Hey everyone, and welcome back. So, the Russia-Ukraine war keeps throwing us curveballs, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, there's a ton to unpack, especially with this recent CBS article on Trump meeting with Macron.
Yeah, that was pretty big.
It was. Macron's the first European leader to visit Trump since he got back in the White House, right?
Right.
And this is all happening right after the G7 call, marking 3 years since the invasion began. Plus, those Western leaders just met with Zelensky in Kyiv, showing their support.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting contrast.
So where do we even begin with this? It's like, are global alliances changing? Is Trump really trying to be a peacemaker, like he says? And what about Zelensky? What happens to him and Ukraine with all this going on?
Yeah, I know. So much to consider.
Okay, let's just dive right in. Expert speaker, when you look at all this, what really jumps out at you?
I think the timing of this meeting with Macron is huge.
Huge. How so?
Well, on one hand, you see all these Western leaders showing solidarity with Ukraine, like a united front.
Right, right.
But on the other hand, here's Trump talking directly with Putin, trying to work out a peace deal. It makes things complicated.
Yeah, it does, especially knowing Trump's history with the whole situation, his whole relationship with Putin.
Exactly.
And he keeps calling himself this peacemaker. He even said, and I'm quoting here, France is America's old ally. Our service partnership has been a force for freedom, prosperity, and peace from the very beginning.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's like he's trying to reassure everyone, especially Europe, that everything's cool. But his actions, well, they seem to tell a different story.
I see what you mean. There's a disconnect there for sure. Trump talks peace, but then you have Macron pushing for this deterrence strategy, which basically means showing strength, being ready to fight back if you need to. He's saying that's the only way to actually get peace.
Interesting.
And the key thing is Macron saying this strategy relies on America's support.
So he's basically saying Europe will step up, but we need the U.S. backing us up.
Exactly.
It's almost like they're speaking different languages.
Yeah.
Trump's always questioned America's role in these global conflicts. And now here's Macron saying they actually need American military support to get peace.
Yeah.
Seems like this could cause some serious tension, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And that tension could spread, It could strain the whole transatlantic alliance, which is already facing its own issues.
Right, right.
And we can't forget this war's impact on the world. It affects international relations, the global economy. It's a big deal.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics of Trump's peace plan. What does it actually involve?
Well, so far, it seems like it's mostly talk. There aren't a lot of concrete details.
Okay, but we do know he talked with Putin directly.
We do. And he keeps stressing that he wants to stop the bloodshed and the fighting.
Okay, but this is also the same Trump who called Putin a genius for invading Ukraine.
Right.
And who seemed to believe Putin over U.S. intelligence during that Helsinki meeting, remember?
Yeah. And let's not forget his consistent praise for Putin's leadership.
Okay, so that brings up a really important question. Is Trump actually aiming for peace? Or is this like a power move for him, something he could personally gain from?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
It makes you wonder if he cares more about, his own legacy or striking some business deals with Russia than he does about the Ukrainian people.
Right, yeah.
Remember that Truth Social post where he mentioned those serious discussions with Putin on ending the war and also major economic development transactions? Makes you think.
It really does. And in that CBS article, he even mentioned making deals right now. Deals right now, what does that even mean? It's just what's going on behind closed doors.
Right. What kind of deals is he talking about? What's he willing to give up?
Exactly.
And those potential deals could be anything. Lifting sanctions, maybe even recognizing Russia's hold on parts of Ukraine. This is serious stuff with serious consequences.
Okay, so Trump's pushing for a deal, but what about Macron? He seems to be caught between a rock and a hard place.
He does.
Trying to stay close to the U.S., but also saying Europe wants to be more independent, play a bigger role in this whole thing.
It's a balancing act. He said, and I'm quoting again, being strong and having deterrence capacities is the only way to be sure it will be respected.
So basically, he's saying Europe has to be able to defend itself with or without America.
Yeah, pretty much. It suggests a shift in the whole transatlantic relationship, even if it's subtle.
He's definitely walking a tightrope. But while Trump and Macron are figuring out their parts, what about Zelensky?
Right.
I mean, he's the one leading his country through this whole mess, but his relationship with Trump, well, it's not exactly friendly.
That's putting it mildly. Trump has actually criticized Zelensky publicly, even calling him a dictator.
Wow.
And he's demanded that Ukraine give something back for the U.S. aid they're getting, specifically access to rare minerals. The whole thing sounds very transactional. Makes you question Trump's commitment to Ukraine and to Zelensky as their leader.
And then there's that Truth Social post where Trump brags about the rare minerals deal and those serious discussions with Putin about ending the war. It almost sounds like he's trying to cut a deal with Putin and leave Zelensky out of it completely. Is that what's happening here?
It definitely seems that way, which is worrying, to say the least. If Zelensky gets pushed aside, what happens to Ukraine's fight for democracy? What happens to the country?
These are huge questions with huge consequences. We've talked about how the US, France, Russia, and Ukraine are all interacting, all these different agendas. It's complicated.
It is.
And the future of Ukraine, the future of global stability, it all hangs in the balance.
It's a tough spot for Zelensky, for sure. He's got this crazy geopolitical situation to deal with. And on top of that, he's got to lead his country through an actual war.
And we can't forget he said he'd be willing to step down if that meant Ukraine could join NATO. That's a big deal.
It is.
Do you think he's feeling the pressure?
Oh, definitely. I mean, pressure from Russia, obviously, but now maybe even from the West, especially with Trump seeming to prioritize his own agenda over what's best for Ukraine.
Makes you wonder if Zelensky offering to step down, if that was actually about finding a peaceful solution, or if it was more strategic, like a way to force the West's hand.
Could be. Maybe a way of saying, hey, I'll make sacrifices, but you guys need to step up too and actually guarantee our security.
Interesting.
Yeah, Zelensky's been pretty smart, a real strategic leader this whole time. He's not afraid to take risks to protect his country.
Okay, but let's say he actually steps down. Then what? Who takes over? Does that just create more chaos? And what does it mean for Ukraine's fight for democracy?
Those are the questions, aren't they? And they're tough ones. I mean, Ukrainian politics are complicated. There's no obvious successor waiting in the wings. If Zelensky goes, it could create a power vacuum, which would mean even more instability and uncertainty.
And what about the war itself? Would a new leader keep fighting, or would they maybe be more open to making deals with Russia, especially if they feel like the West is abandoning them?
That adds another layer of complexity for sure. A new leader, maybe someone more pro-Russia or someone not so committed to the Western alliance, that could totally change the course of the war.
Yeah, it could.
It might even embolden Putin, make him more aggressive, push for even more territory.
This whole thing feels like a high-stakes chess game, but the whole world's watching.
That's a good way to put it. And the stakes are incredibly high. This goes way beyond Ukraine at this point. This conflict will determine the future of global security, the power dynamic between East and West, and even the basic principles of democracy and sovereignty.
Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day headlines and forget about the bigger picture.
It is. It's crucial to zoom out and look at what's really going on.
Absolutely. So what's happening, we're seeing new alliances forming, old ones maybe breaking apart. This war has really shown how vulnerable our interconnected world is. It's like these geopolitical tensions we haven't seen since the Cold War coming back.
It's true. And the economic fallout is already happening. We're seeing the impact on energy prices, supply chains, and inflation is going up.
It's a domino effect. This conflict has consequences that reach everywhere, and we're just starting to see how far they'll go.
That's right.
Okay, so how does all this affect our listener? This might seem like something happening far away, but it's going to impact all our lives in some way.
Right. It already is. We could see prices go up on everyday things like gas and groceries. It could even affect jobs as the global market changes. It could even change how we travel in the future with all these rising tensions.
That's a bit unsettling to think about. We talk about these big global events, but sometimes we forget there are real people affected every day by them.
I agree. We have to remember the human side of things as we try to understand this complex situation.
So with all these different players, all these different goals, what do you think is most likely to happen? Where do we go from here?
It's a tough one. Predicting the future is impossible, but I think there are a few things we can look at to figure out where this is going. First, we need to watch how the U.S. and Europe relate to each other, especially now that Trump's back.
That does seem key. Macron wants a strong, unified response from the West.
Right.
But with Trump being unpredictable and with him seemingly wanting a deal with Putin, it's hard to say if they'll actually stay united.
Exactly. And second, we need to keep a close eye on what's happening inside Russia. The sanctions are hitting them hard, and we're seeing more people speaking out against the government.
Right, right.
This could push Putin towards a solution, or it could make him more desperate, more unpredictable. It's a delicate balance.
It is. He's facing a lot of pressure, both at home and internationally, but he's also shown he'll do whatever it takes to stay in power.
He has. And the third thing to consider is the Ukrainian people. They've been so resilient, so determined throughout this invasion.
They have.
Their willingness to fight, combined with the support from the West, that could actually be what decides how this all ends.
It really shows that even when things seem impossible, the human spirit can still find a way. And it also makes you realize how much this war is costing, how much people are suffering.
It does. It's easy to get caught up in the politics and forget that real people are dealing with the consequences of this war every day. Lives are being lost, families are being torn apart, and a whole generation is going through this trauma.
Before we go any further, I think it's important to take a moment and acknowledge how much suffering this snow has caused. It reminds us that behind the headlines and all the political talk, there are real people whose lives have been changed forever.
I agree. We can't forget about that human element as we talk about this situation.
Okay, so we've talked about what might happen, the main players, and the human cost. But let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. This war has raised some fundamental questions about what global security looks like, about how the world works. What are some of the bigger implications here?
This war has shown us the cracks in the system, especially how much we rely on the U.S. for security, a system that seems to be falling apart because of its own problems.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for decades, the U.S. has been seen as the one keeping the world safe, especially in Europe. But with Trump and his America First idea, and with him questioning NATO, that whole idea is uncertain now.
Right, and now that he's back in the White House and seems more interested in making deals with Putin than supporting Ukraine, that uncertainty is even worse.
You've got it. This war also shows the limits of international organizations like the UN. They're supposed to keep peace, but they haven't been able to do much because Russia, a permanent member, can veto anything.
So if the current system isn't working, what happens next? What kind of new world order will we see after this?
It's the big question, isn't it? Some people think we're moving towards a multipolar world where power isn't just in one place.
Okay, so instead of the U.S. running everything, we might see China, Russia, and other powerful countries having more say.
That's the idea. Others think this conflict will actually make existing alliances stronger, like NATO. They say countries are realizing they need to work together for security in a world that's becoming less stable.
It's like we're at a crossroads. This war could push us toward a multipolar world, or it could make us double down on the alliances we have now. It's really hard to say which way it will go.
It's a crucial moment in history, no doubt. And the choices world leaders make now will have huge consequences.
Okay, we've gone deep into this war, how complicated it is, what might happen, and how it affects the world. But let's bring it back to our listener. You've been following this story, and I'm sure you're wondering, what does all this mean for me? How will this war change my life?
It's a good question, and it's important to answer it directly. This war might feel far away for some people, but it's already affecting the whole world.
We've discussed the economic side of things, but there's more to it than that. There are social and political effects, too.
You're right.
This war has made people question democracy, the role of international organizations, and who has power in the world.
It's a wake-up call for all of us. We can't just ignore what's happening in the world anymore. The decisions our leaders make, the actions different countries take, they'll affect our lives, our communities, and our future.
So what can our listener do? It's easy to feel helpless when faced with such a big, complicated conflict.
It is, but I truly believe that even small things to make a difference. Staying informed is the first step. Have real conversations with friends, family, coworkers, support groups that are helping people affected by the war. And most importantly, make sure your elected officials know what you think.
What do you mean?
Let them know you care about this, and you expect them to act in a way that brings peace and justice.
Every voice counts. Every action, no matter how small, helps to make a difference.
Exactly. And remember, we're all part of history being made right now. We can choose to sit back and watch, or we can try to build a better world.
It reminds us that we're not helpless. We can actually do something.
We have a responsibility to ourselves, our communities, and future generations to create a world that's more fair and peaceful.
Okay, good point. We talked about staying informed and involved, but there's something else that's really important, right? Critical thinking.
Absolutely. It's more important than ever now, with so much information out there, but not all of it is true.
Right, we need to be able to figure out what's fact and what's fiction, spot bias and propaganda, and evaluate information from different places.
Exactly. It's about asking questions, challenging what you think you know, and being willing to change your mind when you learn something new.
So being skeptical, but not cynical. Open to new ideas, but not gullible.
Exactly. And recognizing that most complex problems don't have easy solutions.
This war has shown how complicated the world is, how our lives are all connected, and how fragile peace really is. It can feel overwhelming.
It can. But even in this situation, I think there's some hope. People all over the world are showing support for Ukraine. People are focusing on democracy and freedom again. And we're having important discussions about what the world will look like in the future.
It's good to remember that even when things are bad, the human spirit can still shine through.
I agree. It's a call to action for all of us to work together to build a world that's better, more just, and more peaceful.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive, the changing alliances, the possibility of peace, the effects on the world, and what it all means for you, our listener. We've talked about a lot of heavy stuff, you know?
We have.
Changing alliances, the chance for peace, and just the human cost of this whole thing. It can get overwhelming, but we're not helpless in this situation, are we?
No, definitely not. We can't just sit back and watch this happen. We have to get involved, learn what we can, and do what we believe is right.
So before we finish up, what are the main things you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
Well, the most important thing to remember is this is all still changing. What we think is true today might be different tomorrow. It's important to stay informed and be flexible in how we understand things.
It's like trying to find your way through a thick forest. You're always checking what's around you and changing direction if you hit a roadblock.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to really think critically about the information we get. We need to look at different perspectives and not jump to conclusions too quickly.
So don't just believe everything you see online, and don't assume that just in story is the whole truth.
Right. Do your own research, find reliable sources, and be open to questioning your own beliefs.
And another key point is that this conflict isn't just happening over there. It affects everyone. It goes way beyond Ukraine.
Absolutely. What world leaders do, what countries do, will have a big impact on all of us. We're all connected, even if it doesn't seem like it sometimes.
So what can our listeners actually do about it? It's easy to feel like you can't make a difference in a situation this big and messy.
I know what you mean. But even small actions can help. Start by staying informed, like we've been talking about. Have conversations about this stuff with your friends, family, people you work with. Support organizations that are helping those affected by the war. And maybe most importantly, let your elected officials know what you think.
You mean like reach out to them directly?
Yeah, make sure they know that this matters to you and you expect them to work towards peace and justice.
So every voice matters. Every little thing we do can help.
That's right. And remember, history is happening right now. We're a part of it. We can choose to just watch, or we can try to make the world a better place.
We've covered so much today. Changing alliances, trying to make peace, strained relationships, the global impact. It's a lot to take in. But one thing's for sure, this conflict is about so much more than just military moves or land disputes. It's about the things we value, the kind of future we want, and the world we want to leave for future generations.
It is. It's about democracy versus authoritarianism, about countries being able to decide their own fate, and about the fundamental ideas that our world is built on.
And that brings us to the big question, the one we've been dancing around. What if peace comes at the cost of Ukrainian sovereignty? Is that a price the world is willing to pay?
It's a tough question, one we all need to think about. There aren't easy answers, and the stakes are really high. But by talking about these difficult things, by really looking at the issues, and by demanding more from our leaders, I think we can find a solution that brings both peace and justice.
It won't be easy, but it's definitely worth trying. Expert speaker, thank you so much for your time and for helping us understand this complicated situation.
You're welcome. It's been great talking with you. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay involved. The future really does depend on it.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into something important. Until then, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep working towards a better world.